We have 3 people present and 3 represented by the examples that you have brought. From those you can find many others. But what is your position? Well, I know that looking at Leftloft website, well, he says we are an Italian design company or something similar to that. And therefore, I believe that the point of view of Luciano is, we know, but how do you collocate yourselves in the Italian graphic scenario? Well, no. I personally believe that the concept of nationality and nation is something which is absolutely pernicious. Well, men in some way are identical. They are part of one unique species, and therefore the fact of having a nationality that distinguishes us, well, of course, I'm exaggerating, but I perceive this as very, very strong. I'm very nationalistic, but the objective is that of overcoming, they were from German, Italian, French, and from Marche or Lombardy. We have to find solutions to live well in the world, and this is the work that we do as designers. And therefore, it bothers me sometimes that I'm just labeled as Italian. Not that, of course, well, I do not want to betray the fact that I am a Milanese, lived in Italy, and immersed in a certain type of context, and to having definitely more contacts with Italians than non-Italians. But effectively, just to mention, just a Triestino that is living in, I don't feel Italian, but unfortunately I am. Besides all this, well, I would prefer, and I also believe that it's the moment to start not to think as Italians, French, and German, but as human beings, and therefore reasoning for the consequences and to overcome several. It looks as if I'm being very moralistic right now, but actually living in a situation of the province right now. Well, some things, I live like in a country in the middle of the cake. It looks like a cake, and then it's close to Marche. And some difficulties, I perceive them, with the town close by, with the immigrants who's coming. Well, I'm an immigrant at the same time. I've done the path which is exactly the opposite. I went away from Milan. Usually it's the opposite. And due to this reason, I would prefer in some way to reject this Italian design. Well, made in Italy, okay, in a certain context, but I spoke to decide to speak of Gino Marini, who lives in Osimo in Marche, and therefore, of course, the language we speak and who we relate to is important. But actually, in reality, this does not imply that this actually defines us completely, because we're just thinking on how we are different among Italians. I mean, it really changes from city to city. Things change so much that it makes no sense speaking about one unique population, one unique nation. But maybe I was too moralistic. No, I do agree with Luciano for 2 reasons. Well, I do believe with what Luciano has said. Well, are there some people from Alto Tesini, from Alto Adige? Well, I have a picture that proves that not everyone thinks that this is a manifest that starts. I just read the first part because the second part is too much of a polemics. Therefore, toponomastic is a cultural good. and it follows sustaining some diametral different things, which are those of Luciano. And, well, I do not agree. I believe that, in fact, there is a dimension, logic, and natural, that has to overcome that of the local dimension. The second reason for which I want to give in favor of Italian design and graphics is a matter of school. Well, what is perceived as design and graphic design in Italy? It exists, and from where it comes from, and from where the graphics practiced in Italy. And therefore, I refer myself to the schools, the graphic schools, which are of recent foundation, and the fact that the entire tradition of design and architecture. I think that this is a topic that in some way needs to be considered in speaking of graphics in Italy or Italian graphics. Well, I have discovered to be an Italian designer when I went to live in New York. And I discovered it, really. Well, we have an office in New York, based there, and everything was going through my mind without actually being an Italian designer. We're in an internet era. I mean, if I were to define myself, well, it's something so retro. I would have chosen, I am a modern designer, but since it's something which is, nobody really asks you what you think about it, therefore you're a graphics designer, and that's it. Well, I've discovered to be an Italian designer. There were many more things that keep together the activity that I do, the approach that I have towards design, seeing how other people work, or in other places, because just like product designers and Italian product designer in Italy, okay, because if you start thinking of who does it, like just for the Milanese, who, I mean, well, Italian design exists. Maybe we don't do a good advertising, maybe not too good PRs, but it exists. And how can we say, it is, to me, it has been a discovery and a way, and there's like a fil rouge. There is a thread that links, which is given from an approach which of the teaching compared to the teaching system that we find in other countries, the contamination that does not forbid us to use different kinds of fonts of the prize, Brother Jones. But besides this, I believe that it's absolutely a characteristic that belongs to me as a professional, more than as citizen. I mean, as Italian designer, not as Italian citizen. I mean, we have in terms of training, in terms of education, we have an opening. We always have interners coming not from Italy, people coming, and therefore we accept to carry on an entire topic, which is a professional topic, which is a cultural topic. But this does not forbid us to do it in our way. Therefore, if you have a design path, you carry it on, and that is, I mean, that is without any... Of course, then when we had to go to foreign countries and work, well, of course, this has been recognized as well. I mean, it's a brand that works. Saying that you're an Italian designer, say, oh, wow, how good. I mean, we don't really believe in it as Italians, but in other countries, if you go to New York and you find, you know, you start doing hip-hop, no, I mean... it's no closure here, but actually it's a maximum harmony and confrontation is bringing together different identities and not denying these. Well, Well, of course, it's not denying the nation. This is too vast. I mean, we were not talking about these things. But directly, I believe, according to my opinion, that it is very evident, not known, and therefore this story has to be probably said more. And I believe that the exhibition of Triennale is an exhibition that makes us do it like a jump of awareness among ourselves, and it's definitely something that exists. It's on graphics. One thing that really impressed me, Francesco, that it was said again by Luciano later on, and you were surprised by the fact that I asked you to present this particular project because it's not a very strong visual project. It's made of very subtle elements, and the graphics sorts of disappears. On the other side, we've got a proposal like that of Luciano, which is that of identifying the algorithms which are at the base of our work, to try to eliminate an entire part of them and maintain another part, which is the one which is truly necessary. And therefore, it appears to me that the theme of the absence of the designer in different ways, it has emerged, like in that of Paolo, maybe less. I did not want to interrupt you, but I just wanted to mention one other thing. One in the display of Jim Dine in a museum, well, we had thought of realizing some very beautiful captions made with a folded sheet of paper with some prints with two tacks. Said Jim Dine and said, well, very nice, but this is my exhibition, you know, so no captions. So, just this. I believe we're saying the same thing. I wanted to take a chance to go back on this topic. Well, we're working in a profession that carries on certain traditions that are part of their artisanal tradition, to which we're very linked to. That's part of its practice and very beautiful, but we actually have to confront ourselves with the fact that in the actual dimension to these things you can actually renounce and move our profession in other fronts. And therefore it's very interesting for me to understand what are your points of view according to this. You have noticed if you're actually searching for a move and renouncing to some parts of the work and dedicating yourself to some others. Well, renouncing to the work is always cool, you know, because of course, I mean, great, there's a lot of world, a lot of vacation to do rather than actually a read or, but okay. Well, the art in particular is not the field that needs graphic designers to honestly be and enter the specific. Who lives and like for example, I believe it's a great freedom, the freedom and freeing oneself from techniques. The fact that it's an artisanal technique, when it's repetition and like the invention of the aratro, well, that of course, that's great, you know, it works for you. I mean, fireworks, great, party, it's a great joy, and therefore you can actually focus on other aspects of the project, which are more interesting, clearly. That has some aspects. When I started doing this job, well, I just went around and of the 7 churches, basically asking some designers who were more expert than me some just advice. And we went to Bob Norda, I remember. And we go to his office, and at 7 o'clock in the evening, he was there by himself, and he was there doing the annual report of NL. Well, I said, well, and everyone left. I mean, there was no assistant. We were like, you know, but you're a myth. You know, you're Bob Norda. You shouldn't be what are you doing here by yourself doing the executives? I mean, it's something terrible. And there I did not understand, you know. Well, he was there like a partner. For those of you who don't know, he was a partner of Vignelli at the time. And Massimo and I have done totally different careers because he was better with money. He was the good one with money, to administer money. And the problem was they had a fight on how to actually approach work, and in fact the Unimark just divided, and the problem was that he managed to have the executive pay. No one pays the idea. So of course he was ruined by computer. And in fact, when he said, okay, bring some commercial issues, if they know that I don't take 2 weeks but one evening, they will give me less money, you know, because they pay me just like a worker, not like a product. That's. And therefore this absence of graphics, it's not a problem. It's a problem in certain kinds of projects and in some sectors that effectively don't have any need. But if I do see the value of a lot of purchase that we do, choices that we make, and how much this is guided by the persuasiveness of the images, and I work, and I believe that there's work for millions of years for designers, and the help is not using a technique better. Well, I've noticed one other thing concerning the fact of the disappearing of design. Well, it has affirmed in typography, well, an idea which is back to the 80s, the logic of softwares, in which practically what disappears is the individual author. Well, in some way, I believe that what I actually do is always a product of an era, and therefore it's not of an author, but this sort of disappears as if it happens automatically, as if the author is not an individual or a group well defined, but actually a community who could actually develop things from which you need to develop them. Also in commercial forms, which are not the traditional ones. And in fact, in rule to this, there has been a very strange explosion of types over source, like 30 years late, but how can I say? Well, this thing has definitely created like a mess in the commercializations of fonts and types, and something that the designer disappears is like the author, the fact that a project is of a specific group rather than something that is the fruit of a problem that in some way, and part of some people, well, definitely could actually be in many ways negative in terms of aspects, and it's an aspect which is definitely very important, and in some way it centers our era, which fixes some changes which are not yet. I recommend the reading of Strauss. I can't remember if it's Strauss or Winston. Well, my memory is very terrible, but it's called Accelerando, accelerating, or Accelerando. And it's a science fiction book where it shows a world where there is the human beings are overcome by by the algorithms and mathematics, and it all starts from an idea, like a cooperative idea of comparative logics, and therefore it's something we need to keep in mind in terms of disappearing of designers as a professional figure identified and precise. I just wanted to give just a very precise, just flying much lower in terms of content. Well, it is actually true that in some fields, in some sectors, need less presence of graphics. Contemporary art does not love the presence of graphics, like in the example that I have brought, just like Francesco has brought his witness here. But it is also true that in the work that Francesco has showed, there is graphics, there is design. It is a matter of languages. It's not designed, there is no subabundance of the signs, but the rules that guide the perception and communication, they are there. It's a simple activity of the project, also due to historical reasons, cultural, general, but also technological. The activity of the design is moved towards other fields. It adopts other languages. I wanted to ask a question. Well, if it's a problem of the graphics or designers in general to educate the client, because if we produce quality, or we try, well, maybe someone has to recognize it, and therefore you never hear of speaking of something like that. I don't hear it frequently. It could be interesting to understand if it's a problem that we may face in community in general. Yes. Yes, no. Yes, you need to educate them, but the graphics, from the architects, from the doctors, from but by anyone, I mean butchers as well. I mean, I don't believe, I live daily, but I do not appreciate the human activities that close in one transaction. I believe that there has to be an effort that goes beyond. Once I've said this, well, I am certain that each and every one of us designers has what one deserves. What one deserves to have in terms of results, in terms of clients, in terms of, I don't know if it's, what he deserves. Some people deserve more or less, but the fact is that's what you manage to have. And lamenting of the printer who made a mistake of the color, or lamenting the fact that the client didn't accept a certain solution, besides being useless, denotes like a blindness, because we were not capable, first of all, of choosing the client or creating the conditions for which the client would understand what we're doing. I want to add one more thing. Well, I believe that we could move the matter. We had, like, limiting ourselves to the transaction of commitment and the client and designer. Well, the client is the designer. It's part of the design. It's part of the project. I believe that in terms of urbanistic of De Carlo, well, in reality, according to my opinion, very frequently our work concludes itself with the closure of the contract, and then here's a product, and that's it. Rather, it would be very interesting to interact with the people, and in reality, very many projects, the webs and the softwares, well, this thing allows to do it, and it's mandatory. And therefore, according to my opinion, I would try to abolish the distinction between designer and client. In reality, it's like a group that's designing and that actually includes the people. Well, actually, in practice, clearly the process is very complex, and maybe I've been also very lucky because I've always had, almost always, as clients, some designers at various levels. I mean, they could be graphics or not. Well, I've always had a relationship which is pretty privileged compared to the traditional graphic designer. Well, effectively working together rather than in an idea of like a conflictual exchange. Well, you're a bit radical, aren't you? Almost communist. He's more conservative, he says. Well, if I've understood what you meant, a question that we've talked about They ask me so many times, I mean, and I believe that the answer is, even though it's absolutely in the relationship with the client, you don't have to educate anyone. Well, it would be as if someone would try to convince me that I have to have handmade shoes and not the industrial ones because they're much better. I mean, if you think about it, just externally, I mean, there is not the guy there of the bakery who stops me and he says, hey, you're eating cornetto, algida, €1, 20 euros, I give you a nice, good, sweet. I mean, there is a fascinating thing of the bakery that if you want something good, you want to, of course, go to the house of someone, have something special. Well, you will go to the bakers, the patisserie, or the Marinella ties, or a customized made. We are in a world deprofessionalized, not only in the graphics, the absence, it's the era of the practitioners. I mean, the self-building of Mari. I mean, the client has a software and does what he wants. Can we limit all this? I mean, I think it's excellent. We can do our own ring of the phone. I mean, I'm a bit older than you. I said, oh, I'll never have this. This is super stupid. Now I have like 40 different rings, and whoever calls me rings it differently. They didn't force me. They have seduced me. It's a different kinds of relation. I'm convinced I need an iPhone. Maybe I'm an idiot. Probably I am, but I really need an iPhone now. Well, there is a cultural level where you may do very many things, and who knows me knows that one tries to do the culture and elevate the culture. But this thing has to remain out of the client committee. And if a client doesn't really understand what you're selling to him, it means he doesn't want to pay it, and therefore it's much better not to stay in a relation with you because he's a client today. Then obviously there are relations that in time you understand each other and you sort of like, if a client thinks they call you loghetto rather than logo. Can you do me a loghetto? Which is like a diminutive. It means, what's a loghetto? Tiny logo? What does that mean? That you take less? I do it black and white? You know, this is the culture. In front of a person like that, you should substitute the client, the industry, as professionals. Well, we have been like broken down in the selection of clients, in the sense that, and if you look in the 40s, or after the war, who were the colleagues of the time? Well, who knows? Budget studio, these mythological studios. Well, these realities had the best clients. The great industries, the institutions, all that? Well, no. I'm just saying that if today the majority of these great clients go somewhere else, advertising agencies or other situations, it's because in the offer they do not see us as a necessity, and therefore it's not that you address the guy who does oil, who doesn't understand anything in graphics. Of course, well, of course you have to have McKen when he's doing the Carapelli. Well, I don't really believe in the education of the client once he's a client. I believe in developing a taste which is diffuse, which is a role that, since there is the University of Design, well, it has changed. The ones of the advertising agencies, they understand that there are very many fonts they didn't know before. No, but in fact, education of the client should not be intended in a well-aimed. It's not to the single client that's convincing that the fact of the baker who comes to you and he's explaining, but actually I believe that in the practice of the work there is a way of supplying some tools which are capable to elevate the average client. The client, which is super important, which is 50% of the final result, if not the 40 maybe. Well, I believe that there is an attitude. I believe that it has to be maintained, an attitude of growth. Once we said this, well, we also have to understand that the average quality of the Italian commissions is collapsed. It's embarrassing. In the last 15 years, the public and the private world has come closer. The clients, the public clients, have acquired all the characteristic of the private, losing the quality which traditionally it used to contain. And this is a big problem. It's a very big problem for those like me who work with the public, but it's also a great problem for everyone. I wanted to make a small precisation on the topic of the self. Well, if there is a self-design, well, you can do some things more autonomously. Well, this, in some cases, it's something that has some interesting results. On the other point of view, rather, producing some tools because people can eventually have a self-design, well, it's not absolutely easy. It's actually the opposite. And there is a lot of work for designers, more in large sense. Now the boundary between engineer and designing mathematicians becomes more and more an opinion. I wanted to ask a question concerning Italy, concerning the central theme given to this talk. It is a generator of cliché, the banality, according to my opinion. More or less, you can find clichés of any kind, and especially in the world of design and graphics, I can see that more or less these are all negative. Well, if you read blogs, well, they're all negative. They all focus on different kinds of projects, but I can also notice that there is no love for Italy, and this is a pity, I believe, especially for the backgrounds that we've had. There is a future of design which is more cosmopolitan and not in a historical point of view. It's actually a pity that there is the history of Italian design, especially in the graphics, that has been left behind, also in typography. And therefore, I wanted to ask you if this vision is true, or if eventually, if it's just marked by who speaks about it. The cliché are in the head of who uses them, and in general, and you should forget about the clichés and generalizations, and therefore I do not believe that the analysis on a perception of Italy has to be conducted, admitted that they do have a sense, well, they have to be sent in a more in-depth analysis and places. Well, I believe that the problems are founded in terms of conservation of the archaeological sites or the cultural elements and the causes that generate this perception. Well, in general, it's a different approach, which is too general, too broad, and I believe that the graphics in Italy is much better in the 10 than in the 80s, 90s. It's growing constantly in the last 10, 15 years. There were very few cases, a few studies, a lot of individualities. Well, we can also not care about this, but as designers, well, the story of the public and the government commissions, and I believe that nowadays there are people who are 15 years younger than me, and they are super good, and therefore I believe it's very much in growth, and I believe that in Italy there are very many, more and more actually, characters in the field of design, and I wanted to say just two things due to the fact it is not a problem, or actually it is not the primary problem, the problem of Italy. Well, the purpose would be, in my opinion, trying to produce with all our treasure and our training and our education that I believe that it's not totally Italian, and especially Italy as a state doesn't really exist since a long time, and not for a very long time. Well, let's hope to overcome the situation. Well, anyways, the problem is that of trying to make the world better compared to what it was. Therefore, for them being Italian, Swiss, or French, second thing. These were German, or kind of was German. He was Hebrew. Riffel and Petrucci were Italian. Italian. What did Italian meant at the time? One was from Bologna, the other from Rome, and Bartolomeo was from Vicenza, and therefore from another state. What is the patrimony? The Italian. Linked to a territory, linked to a historical period, a cultural context, which is not Italiano-centric, and it was attracting the people in some way. There were conditions of economy that were forcing people to move, and therefore it has created a conjunction of a certain type. Defining this Italian, well, and not of all men, well, basically I believe it's, let me just repeat, but it's just a way of selling ourselves better, saying that it's Italian and we earn more money for it, okay, but the final purpose is true, and the truth is different. In reality, it just comes back again and again. Why can't we sell ourselves? We have to sell ourselves how? Well, the sense is that if one's good, is good. I mean, if Renzo Piano, they call him all over the world, is because he's Renzo Piano. To have some clients, of course, you need to have someone who pays you, and therefore design develops on those directions. In Urbino, where there's no economy, but if you take a look at, there is an A4 Turin, Venice, the highway, there is the Italian graphics. Torino, Trieste, not Venezia. Absolutely. And then on the Adriatics, where there are the business who want to invest and invest on the and use design. Well, the offer that they find right now is definitely a good offer, and it's obvious. It's a good place because there's a lot of people who need graphics, and the privates have given space and find, well, a lot of energies, like the Turin scene, which is very, very rich, and therefore in this no territory, besides any kind of thing, we could say, well, there are people who are good, and there are people who give them to work, and therefore this is exactly what I'm saying. There are also people who work for foreign countries, though. Yes, there are people who work, yes, even better. I mean, absolutely, there is no problem. And, well, okay, if they say they've done this, they've done that, well, there always exists, but let's make sure that there is a lack of auto-promotion of designers, because there is a culture which there is too much passion for the work, and therefore this part of the sales of the work that we try which is the reason of our work, the fact that it's our baker doing it. It's not enough that your dish is good, you need to have a lot of various things that make me come to your bakery. We don't do that, and that is also something that, I don't know, like having a hairdresser who has no good hairstyling, right? Therefore, one thing that I've learned is that they are not very, very good, and they believe nothing more than appearing and having, in New York, this is what I meant, well, it's almost embarrassing in terms of commerciality that this work is truly identical to having a hairstylist and, you know, the gala graphic studio and so on. Italians are not. Because if you're Vignelli, you need to live in that market, and therefore if you're a designer, an international designer, and the style, in that case, Italian in the origin in New York. But he behaves as an American, with the rules of that market, with the rule... Well, ours are impersonal brands, more human, but I actually see it as a good moment. Who has opened or tried to act as a freelance, well, he's managing to doing things like that. Well, these are strange years, but okay. Okay, you didn't have any fight, and therefore we were expecting you to have a fight tomorrow in the blogs of design. Everybody would have talked about this. It's incredible. I kept on saying, oh, I called 3 very different, one from the other, declaring that tomorrow in the blogs of graphics no one will talk about anything else. There's no front page for a newspaper. Okay, you gave us very many things which are more interesting, on which we can reason, and therefore I thank you very much. And therefore, in May, there is the next appointment, the 9th of May, with Udas Mishouden Avifares, Lebanese, who studied in the States, and he will speak about typography between the European world and the Arabic world, and many other more interesting things. I hope to see you again, and bye.